It was a bright and peaceful morning on Earth when John first heard the strange sound in the sky. At first, he thought it was a bird or some kind of aircraft. But as the noise grew louder, he realized something much bigger was coming down. It was like a roar of metal tearing through the air. He looked up in shock as the sky seemed to tear open and a small ship plummeted toward the ground. The ship crashed into a forest clearing, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. John's heart raced as he quickly grabbed his radio and called for backup, but he knew he had to act fast. Without wasting time, he rushed through the forest toward the crash site, the thick trees and underbrush making the journey harder. When he finally reached the clearing, he stopped in his tracks. The ship was in pieces, but it still looked surprisingly intact. It looked nothing like the aircraft he was used to. It was sleek, with strange markings all over its surface. His eyes widened as he realized this wasn't just any crash. This was an alien ship. He crouched low behind a tree, peeking out to get a better look. That's when he saw her. A young girl, about the same age as his younger sister, stepped carefully out of the wreckage. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked completely out of place. She was not human. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, and she had delicate pointed ears. Her clothes were strange too, unlike anything John had ever seen. They looked like they were made from some kind of shimmering fabric that seemed to change colors with the light. The girl was trembling, staring at the wreckage with wide eyes, as though she couldn't believe what had just happened. Her hands were shaking as she took a step forward, cautiously looking around the clearing. John's first instinct was to approach her, to offer help. But as he took a step forward, the girl froze and turned toward him, her eyes wide with fear. She looked terrified, as though she had seen a ghost. For a moment, neither of them moved. John's mind raced. What did he do? What could he say? He had never met an alien before, and now here was one, standing right in front of him. He wasn't sure if he should talk or wait for backup. His training told him to be careful, but the girl didn't seem dangerous. She was just scared. Slowly, he took a few steps forward, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture, showing her he meant no harm. "Hey," he said gently. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." But the girl's eyes widened even more and she stepped back. Her breathing became faster, and her eyes flickered down to his hands, then to his face, before darting to the ground. She thought he was going to hurt her. John could see the panic in her eyes, and it made his heart drop. She was terrified, her body shaking like a leaf in the wind. "Please, don't hurt me," she suddenly said, her voice shaking. It was soft but clear, with a strange accent. She looked like she was trying to say something more, but the words didn't come out. She looked confused and scared, like she didn't know how to speak to him. John blinked, surprised. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, a little louder. He took another step forward, slowly and cautiously. "I'm here to help." But the girl took another step back, her eyes now locked on him in a mix of fear and confusion. She muttered something under her breath, and John wasn't sure if she was talking to him or herself. I thought you were a carnivore," the girl said in a barely audible voice, her words trembling. John furrowed his brows. "Carnivore? What did she mean by that?" he was about to ask, when the girl suddenly dropped to her knees, looking more terrified than ever. She stared at the ground as though expecting something to happen. John paused, unsure of what to do next. He was trained to handle dangerous situations, but this didn't feel dangerous. It felt like she was just frightened and confused. "Hey, it's okay," John repeated, his voice gentle. "I'm a human. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to help you." The girl raised her head slightly, her eyes still filled with fear. She didn't speak right away, just watched him carefully. He could see her hesitating, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "Are you going to eat me?" she whispered. John was so shocked by her question that he didn't know how to respond at first. Eat her? What kind of question was that? Eat you, John repeated, blinking. Why would I eat you? The girl's eyes darted nervously. You're a carnivore, aren't you? You eat meat? She asked, her voice trembling as she said the word meat. John's confusion deepened. What in the world was she talking about? Did she think he was going to eat her like some kind of predator? He shook his head quickly. No, I'm not going to eat you. I'm not like that, he said, trying to sound reassuring. I'm a soldier. I'm here to help. For a long moment, the girl didn't move. Then her eyes softened slightly, though she still looked unsure. You're not a carnivore? No, John replied firmly. I'm not. I promise. The girl looked at him carefully as if she were trying to read his face for signs of deceit. After a long, tense moment, she seemed to relax, just a little bit, though she still didn't trust him fully. John took a deep breath, stepping forward slowly. He was trying his best to show her that he wasn't a threat. But this was unlike any situation he'd faced before. I'm not going to hurt you, he repeated, this time softer, more certain. The girl hesitated, then finally nodded, though she still looked unsure. She glanced down at the wreckage of her ship, then back at John. You really want to help me? She asked quietly. John smiled gently. Yes, I do. I'll help you get back on your feet. Let's get you out of here. John watched as the young alien girl cautiously rose to her feet, her eyes still filled with doubt. Her gaze flickered nervously from the wreckage of her ship to him, then back again. She looked so fragile and small, standing alone in the middle of the forest, as if she didn't quite belong there. But she was here, and John had no idea how to help her. He cleared his throat and took a step forward, trying to reassure her once more. Okay, he said slowly. Let's get you to a safe place. I'm not going to hurt you. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, and she tilted her head as though she didn't understand. Safe place? She echoed, her voice trembling. What do you mean? John paused, realizing that he wasn't speaking the same language as her. Despite her strange accent, he could tell she was struggling to communicate. Her words were soft and hesitant, and it made him feel more uncertain than ever. I mean, a place where you're not in danger, he said slowly, trying to explain. You need to rest. We can fix your ship. You'll be okay. The girl shook her head and took a step back, looking around the forest as though searching for a way to escape. I don't know if I can trust you. John's heart sank. He had to find a way to make her feel safe. I get it, he said gently. I'm a stranger to you, but I swear I'm not going to hurt you. The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the ground, as though contemplating something important. John noticed the way her hands were trembling, her fingers twitching, as if she was ready to bolt at any second. He realized just how scared she was, and it made him feel helpless. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. You're not going to eat me? John blinked, completely taken aback. He had thought they'd made some progress. But it seemed that her fear was still overwhelming her. He hadn't expected to hear that question again. Eat you? John repeated, frowning in confusion. Why would I eat you? The girl flinched at his raised voice, her eyes darting to the side. She quickly covered her mouth with her hands as though worried she had said something wrong. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I heard stories. Stories? John asked, more curious than ever. What kind of stories? The girl's eyes shifted nervously, and she seemed hesitant to answer. Our people are taught to be afraid of carnivores, she explained slowly. We were told that carnivores eat other creatures. They hunt them. John's confusion deepened, and he couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and sympathy. You think I'm a carnivore? She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Humans they eat meat. I thought you would eat me. John's heart softened, and he could see how much her fear was weighing on her. It made him realize just how much she didn't know about humans, how little she understood. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the result of a lifetime of fear and mistrust. He took a deep breath and knelt down to her level, trying to make himself seem less threatening. I don't eat meat, he said firmly. Not everyone does, and I definitely don't eat people. I'm not like that. The girl hesitated, still unsure of his words. But you look like one. You have teeth, she said, glancing at his mouth, her voice still shaky. John couldn't help but chuckle softly at her innocence. I do have teeth, he admitted, but they're for eating plants and other food, not for hunting or hurting anyone. She stared at him for a long moment, as though searching for any sign that he was lying. But John stayed still, meeting her gaze. He had nothing to hide, and he wanted her to see that. Finally, she seemed to relax a little, though the fear in her eyes didn't completely disappear. I don't know what to believe, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you. John sighed, understanding the depth of her fear. I know it's hard, he said gently, but I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help. There was a long pause before the girl finally nodded. Just barely. She didn't speak, but it was clear that she was at least considering his words. All right, John said, rising to his feet. Let's get moving. There's a camp nearby. You can rest there. The girl looked at him again, her brow furrowed, with uncertainty. She glanced down at the ground, thinking it over. Then, after a few moments of silence, she hesitantly nodded and took a small step toward him. John smiled, relieved. Good, he said, offering his hand. You can trust me. The girl looked at his hand for a moment, unsure. She seemed to struggle with whether or not to take it, but finally she reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his. Together they started walking toward the camp. As they moved, John kept a careful eye on her, noticing how she kept glancing around nervously as though expecting something to jump out at her. It was clear that every sound made her jump, every movement in the trees made her tense. John couldn't blame her. She had no idea where she was, and the fear of the unknown was something he could understand. The more they walked, the more John could see how alone she truly was. She didn't seem to have any idea how to survive on this planet, let alone how to fix her ship. Her people's fear of humans and carnivores had left her isolated, trapped in her own world of confusion and fear. He knew that earning her trust would take time, but for now, the small steps they were taking together were enough. He hoped that, in time, she would understand that not all humans were what her people had warned her about. For now, he would do everything he could to keep her safe and show her that not all creatures, even carnivores, could be dangerous. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the dense forest as John and the alien girl walked along the narrow trail. The air was cool and the sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls were constant, but it didn't seem to calm her. She kept looking around, her eyes wide, her body tense. John kept his pace slow, careful not to rush her. He knew she was still adjusting to the situation. She had never been to Earth before, and every step of the way was filled with uncertainty, for her. Yet she hadn't turned back. She was still walking beside him, which gave him hope. He glanced at her, trying to think of a way to make her feel more comfortable. I know this must be confusing for you, he said gently, but you're safe with me. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. The girl looked up at him, her face softening slightly. She nodded, though the fear never quite left her eyes. I don't know why I'm still here, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I should be going back to my ship, fixing it. I have to go home. John stopped and turned to her. the concern in his eyes clear. "You can't fix the ship right now. You're not alone in this. You need to rest first. The ship can wait. We can figure it out together." She seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded again. "You're right. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go." Her voice broke slightly as she said it, and John could hear the vulnerability beneath her words. She wasn't just scared of him. She was scared of everything, of being lost, of not knowing what would happen next. John sighed. He knew this feeling all too well. He had been in dangerous situations before, times when he had no idea how things would turn out. But the difference was, he was human. He had his training, his resources, and most of all, his instincts to guide him. She had none of that. "We'll find a way to help you," John said with a firm nod, trying to sound confident. "We'll take this one step at a time." The alien girl looked at him for a moment, then turned her gaze back to the path ahead. She was still unsure, but there was a faint flicker of hope in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. The two of them continued walking, John making sure to stay close, offering the occasional reassuring word or glance. As they went, John noticed something. Her behavior was slowly changing. She was starting to relax a little. She no longer flinched at every small sound, nor did she seem as nervous around him. She was still cautious, but it was a little less tense. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, a peaceful place near a creek where the ground was soft and dry. John stopped and turned to her. "This will be a good place to rest," he said. "We can set up a small camp here." The girl looked around, her eyes taking in the scene. It wasn't much, just a quiet spot surrounded by tall trees and the sound of the creek flowing gently nearby. But it was safe, and it seemed to put her at ease. She nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a little. John began gathering some branches and dry leaves, preparing a small fire. He knew they couldn't stay here forever, but it was important to rest, to take a break from the constant tension. He wanted to give her a chance to breathe, to stop feeling like everything was falling apart. As he worked, the girl watched him from a distance. She wasn't sure what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before, surrounded by a human and so far from everything she knew. But there was something in the way John worked, steady, calm, and without fear, that made her feel, just for a moment, like she could trust him. Finally, after a few minutes, John had gathered enough firewood to start a small flame. He struck a match and carefully lit the dry branches. Soon, a warm, crackling fire was dancing in the center of the clearing. "There," John said, wiping his hands on his pants. "It's not much, but it'll keep us warm for the night." The girl moved. Closer to the fire, her steps tentative. She seemed to be unsure of whether she should get too close, but John could see the curiosity in her eyes. She had never seen fire before, or at least not like this. She seemed fascinated, watching the way the flames flickered and danced. John sat down on a large rock nearby, motioning for her to join him. "You should sit down. You've been walking all day. You need to rest." The girl hesitated before sitting down on the ground a little farther from the fire, her eyes still watching the flames. John could tell she was still processing everything. She wasn't used to this, used to being on Earth, surrounded by things that were so different from her own world. After a few minutes of silence, John spoke again. "I know it's hard," he said quietly, "but you're not alone. I'm here. We'll figure this out together." The girl nodded slowly, though she didn't speak right away. She simply watched the fire, her thoughts a mystery to him. John wondered what it must have been like for her, coming from a peaceful world where everyone lived in fear of humans. How long had she been running from that fear? How long had she been told that humans were something to be afraid of? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. He had to help her. He had to show her that not all humans were dangerous. Not all were out to hurt her. There was kindness in the world, even if it took time to see it. After a long while, the girl finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me." John turned to her, surprised at the sincerity in her words. He smiled and nodded. "It's nothing. Just doing what I think is right." The alien girl sat in silence, her gaze still on the fire. As she watched the flames, something shifted within her. The fear was still there, but now there was something else, too. A small spark of trust. John glanced up at the sky, where the stars were beginning to appear. The night was falling quickly, and the air was growing colder. He knew they would need to get more supplies soon. But for tonight, this was enough. The alien girl, though still frightened, was starting to trust him, and that was the first step. The fire crackled softly in the clearing, its warm light dancing across the faces of John and the alien girl. The night had grown colder, but the fire kept them comfortable. John had given her some space, letting her settle into her thoughts, but now he could sense the quiet curiosity in her eyes. She was beginning to open up, little by little, and he wanted to take this opportunity to learn more about her world. He sat cross-legged near the fire, trying to make himself approachable. The girl, who had introduced herself as Lyra, was still, sitting a little farther away, her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were focused on the fire, but John could tell her thoughts were elsewhere. After a few moments, John broke the silence. "So, tell me about your planet," he said gently, trying to sound casual. "What's it like where you come from?" Lyra shifted slightly, her eyes flickering toward him. She hesitated, but then, perhaps sensing that he wasn't going to judge her, she began to speak. "It's called Vela," she said, her voice soft, almost like she was sharing a secret. "It's a peaceful world. My people, we don't fight, not in the way humans do. We live in harmony with nature. We don't take more than we need." John listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. He had heard of peaceful alien species before, but he didn't know much about them. "Sounds beautiful," he said with a smile. "What's it like there? Are there cities? People?" Lyra's face softened as she spoke about her home. "We have cities, but they're very different from yours. They're built into the land, not on top of it. We don't build tall towers or make a lot of noise. Everything is quiet, calm. The people there, we work together. We don't have much fighting." John was struck by the way she spoke. There was an innocence in her words, a sense of wonder about her planet. He could almost imagine the peaceful world she described, a place without the conflicts that Earth often faced. "What kind of people are they?" John asked, genuinely curious. Lyra paused, thinking carefully before she answered. "We're herbivores," she said slowly. "We only eat plants. We don't hunt other creatures for food. It's a way of life. We believe in taking only what we need, never more. And we respect all life." John thought about this for a moment. It was so different from the way humans lived. On Earth, people ate meat, farmed animals, and built their cities on the land. But Lyra's people, it seemed, lived in balance with nature. They didn't take more than they needed. They respected life, even if they didn't understand it. "That sounds peaceful," John said softly. "I wish more people on Earth lived like that." Lyra nodded, her eyes distant as if she were picturing her home. "It's the way we've always lived. We were taught to fear carnivores, though. We were told that humans, they eat other creatures. They hunt and kill. That's why I was so afraid when I saw you." John winced, realizing how deep her fear ran. He understood now. That it wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, it was rooted in her culture. Her people had taught her that humans were dangerous, that they could not be trusted. "I understand why you were afraid," John said gently. "You've been taught something your whole life, and I must seem like a stranger to you. But I want you to know, not all humans are like that. Not everyone hunts. Not everyone wants to harm others." Lyra's gaze softened. She seemed to be considering his words, her face reflecting the weight of the thoughts running through her mind. "I'm learning," she said quietly. "I didn't know that humans could be kind." John smiled, feeling a sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "Kindness is part of being human," he said. "I know we're not perfect, but we try." There was a long silence as Lyra gazed into the fire. She seemed lost in thought. John didn't want to push her, so he let her be. But after a while, she spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "On Vela, we don't have wars," she said. "We don't fight each other. We don't understand why humans do." "Why do you fight? What is it for?" John wasn't prepared for this question. He hadn't expected to talk about war. Not tonight, not with her. But she was asking, and he didn't want to lie to her. "It's complicated," John began slowly. "Humans fight for many reasons. Sometimes for land, sometimes for resources, sometimes for power. But it's not always like that. There are good reasons, too. We fight to protect our homes, our families, our way of life." Lyra nodded slowly. Her brow furrowed as she thought it over. "That sounds painful," she said quietly. "Why can't you just talk instead of fight?" John looked down at his hands, unsure of how to answer. "It's not always that simple. People don't always listen to each other, and sometimes when you feel threatened, you don't know what else to do. But I believe that talking is always better than fighting. We should try harder to listen to each other." Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, as though seeing him in a new light. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "Maybe there's another way." John smiled, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face. "I think there's always another way. We just have to find it." The two of them sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to Lyra in this moment. Despite their differences, despite the vast distances between their worlds, they shared something fundamental. They both wanted peace. Both wanted a world where kindness and understanding mattered more than fear and violence. Finally, Lyra spoke again, her voice more confident now. "I'm glad you didn't hurt me," she said with a small smile. "I'm glad you're here." John's heart warmed at her words. "I'm glad I'm here too," he said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out. Together." The next morning, the camp was quiet. The only sound the gentle rush of the creek nearby. The fire from the previous night had long since burned out, leaving only the faint scent of smoke in the air. John and Lyra had slept under the stars, but it had been a restless night for both of them. Despite the calming atmosphere of the forest, Lyra still had nightmares about her crash. She woke several times during the night, her breathing sharp and fast, only to fall back into fitful sleep. John kept a close watch on her, but he didn't press her for conversation. He knew she needed time, and he didn't want to rush her. She had been through so much already, being stranded on a strange planet, away from everything she knew. But the morning brought a change. Lyra seemed more focused today, more determined. She stood near the creek, her blue skin glistening in the early light, her eyes scanning the forest. "We need to find more supplies," John said, standing up and stretching his arms. "We'll need food and maybe something to help repair your ship. The sooner we find what we need, the sooner you can get back home." Lyra nodded, her eyes distant but more resolute than before. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But I don't know how to find those things. I don't know where to look." John offered a reassuring smile. That's why we're in this together. I know this forest pretty well, and we can use what's around us. You know plants. I know how to hunt, and we can always work as a team." Lyra looked at him, her gaze softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm still not sure if I can trust you completely, but I'm starting to think maybe I can." John didn't know what to say to that. He was just glad she was starting to trust him, even if just a little. The past few days had been filled with tension, misunderstandings, and a lot of fear, but they had made it this far, and they were both alive. That was something. "All right, let's go then," he said, offering her a hand. "We have a long day ahead of us." Lyra hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. Together, they began to make their way through the forest, moving at a steady pace. John kept his eyes on the trail ahead, alert to any sounds or movements around them. He knew that there were dangers in the forest, wild animals, predators, and the constant threat of them getting lost. But he couldn't help but feel a little more hopeful today. He was used to surviving in the wild. He knew how to find food and shelter. But this was different. With Lyra by his side, the journey felt more like an adventure than a survival test. They walked for hours, the forest stretching out endlessly before them. Lyra seemed to relax a little, her steps more confident, as she began to pick up on the different plants and trees around them. She pointed out flowers and herbs, explaining what they were used for in her world. John listened carefully, impressed by how much she knew about nature. As they walked, they came across a small clearing, and John's instincts kicked in. He motioned for Lyra to stop and crouched low, peering through the bushes. There, grazing, peacefully in the sunlight, was a herd of small, deer-like creatures. They had soft brown fur and long, slender legs. John recognized them as the native herbivores of the forest. They weren't dangerous, but they could provide them with much-needed food. John turned to Lyra, his voice low and calm. "I'm going to catch one of those. We need something to eat, and this will help us." Lyra's eyes widened as she watched the creatures. "You're going to hunt them?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. John nodded. "It's the only way. But don't worry. I won't hurt them more than I have to." Lyra stood still, watching him closely. "I don't understand. Where I'm from, we don't hunt. We don't harm the animals. We live in harmony with them." John understood her hesitation. He knew she was used to a world where killing wasn't necessary. But here on Earth, things were different. He needed to provide for both of them, and hunting was part of survival. "I understand," John said softly. "But sometimes, survival means we have to do things we don't like. We don't take more than we need. I'll make sure it's quick and respectful." Lyra nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. She watched as John quietly moved into position, crouching low in the grass. His training kicked in, and he moved with careful precision, making no noise as he slowly closed the distance between himself and the herd. He knew he had to act quickly before they noticed him. The moment came, and with a quick, fluid movement, John leaped forward, grabbing one of the animals by its neck and bringing it down swiftly. The others scattered in panic, but John was focused on the one he had caught. He made sure it was painless, then quickly moved to gather what he needed. Lyra stood back, watching the entire process with wide eyes. She didn't understand it, but she knew it was necessary. She had never seen anything like this before, and it made her feel uneasy. She had been raised to respect all living creatures, never to harm them, never to take more than was needed. John returned to her with the meat, his hands clean but his expression serious. "I know this is hard for you," he said quietly, "but this is how we survive here. We take only what we need." Lyra nodded slowly, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. "I don't like it," she said softly, "but I understand. John, smiled gently. Thank you for understanding. It's not easy, but sometimes we have to do things that feel wrong to keep going. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, more plants for food, a few tools to help with repairs on the ship, and whatever else they could find. As the sun began to set again, they made their way back to the camp. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lyra looked at John with a new understanding. She had seen him hunt, seen him fight for their survival. It wasn't easy for her, but she was beginning to see things from his perspective. They weren't so different after all. Both of them wanted to live, to find a way to survive, and they were willing to do whatever it took. Thank you, Lyra said quietly as they settled down for the night. For everything. John smiled, his voice calm and sincere. We're in this together, Lyra. We'll make it through. And for the first time in a long while, both of them believed it. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the horizon, casting warm, golden light over the forest. John stretched as he woke up, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long days of walking and surviving. His eyes quickly scanned the camp. Lyra was already awake, sitting by the fire, her gaze focused on the sky above. There was a quiet calm to her now, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. John smiled to himself. In the few days they had been traveling together, he had seen her change. She had started off so frightened, so uncertain about everything. But now she was beginning to trust him, beginning to understand Earth in a way she never had before. He stood up and walked over to her. Morning, he said, his voice friendly and warm. Lyra turned to him and gave a small, hesitant smile. Good morning, she replied softly. I was just thinking about what happens next. John nodded. He had been thinking about that too. They had been living in survival mode for so long, and now they were at a point where they needed to plan. Lyra needed to return home. They had to figure out how to repair a ship and get her back to Vela. But there were still many unknowns. We've made good progress, John said. We've gathered supplies and we've got some tools. I think we can repair your ship, if we can find the right parts, but we still have to figure out where to go next. Lyra looked down at the ground, her fingers tracing small patterns in the dirt. I don't know if I can go back to Vela, she said, her voice quiet. I've been away for so long and things aren't the same there. I'm not sure if they'll accept me. I don't know if I belong anymore. John sat down beside her, his expression serious. He understood how she felt. He had seen people in his own life struggle with where they belonged. You'll always belong, Lyra. No matter what happens, you're part of your world, and no matter what happens with the ship, I'll help you find a way back. Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, she looked truly hopeful. Thank you, John, she said softly. I'm not sure what would have happened without you. I thought humans were all dangerous. But you've shown me that not all of you are like that. John smiled gently. Not all humans are the same. There's good and bad everywhere. But we can make the world better by choosing to do good. You've shown me a lot about how to live in harmony with nature. It's something I want to learn more about. Lyra's face brightened as she heard his words. You really want to learn about my world? Absolutely, John said with a chuckle. I've been learning from you every day. I think there's a lot we could teach each other. The two of them spent the rest of the morning talking about their different worlds. Lyra taught John about the plants and animals of Vela, explaining how her people lived without harming the land. In return, John shared stories of Earth, about its history, its cultures, and how humans had built so many different ways of living. As the hours passed, the conversation grew lighter. They laughed together, finding common ground in their differences. It was a moment of peace, something they hadn't had in a long time. By midday, they began to gather their things. They had a plan now, find the parts for Lyra's ship and work together to get it fixed. but they still had a long journey ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but they were ready. John turned to Lyra, his eyes serious once again. "We should start heading out soon. There are still a few supplies I need to gather, and we need to find the ship's power source. If we're going to fix it, we'll need everything to be in one place." Lyra nodded, her expression focused. "I'm ready. I'll help in any way I can." As they packed their belongings, John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. He had never imagined that he'd be helping an alien, someone from another world, but in the days they had spent together, they had become more than just two strangers. They had become partners, and partners stuck together no matter what. They walked for several more hours, following the trail John had set. They talked as they walked, sharing stories and ideas about how they might repair the ship. John was impressed by Lyra's knowledge of technology. Despite being from a peaceful planet, she had learned a great deal about machines, engineering, and space travel. She was resourceful, clever, and more than capable. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the trees, they reached a clearing. In the distance, John could see the remains of the crashed ship. It was still partially buried in the ground, but the main section was visible. They would need to gather tools and spare parts, but John was confident they could make it work. Lyra stood still for a moment, staring at the ship. It was clear that this was a difficult sight for her. This was her way home, and yet the thought of returning was still filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what will happen when I get back," she said softly. "But I think I'm ready to go home. I have to try." John stepped up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'll be with you. We'll figure it out together." Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, John. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," John said with a smile. "Helping you is enough. We've been through a lot together, and I think we've both learned something important." The two of them walked toward the ship, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to fixing the ship wouldn't be easy, but it was the path they were on now, and they would face it together. As they began to work, John felt a sense of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He had made a true friend, and no matter what happened, they would always have this bond, this connection between them. Lyra glanced up at him, a look of determination in her eyes. "We can do this," she said quietly. John smiled back. "Yes, we can." And in that moment, surrounded by the remains of an alien ship, John knew that together they could face anything.